You always think you are alone in your car. The doors are locked, the windows are rolled up, the engine is a steady, predictable hum, but true isolation is an illusion. We are constantly surrounded by the invisible detritus of other lives. I found the phone on a Tuesday. It was wedged deep between the driver's seat and the center console of a rental car. My fingers brushed against it while I was reaching for a dropped coin. It did not feel like a modern piece of technology. It was heavy, dense, and cold. I pulled it out into the pale light of the parking garage. It was a Nokia from the early 2000s. The dark gray plastic casing was scuffed and deeply scratched, bearing the scars of a decade spent in the dark. The screen was fractured down the middle, a spiderweb of dead pixels and shattered glass. The battery casing in the back was swollen, bulging against the plastic cover. By all laws of physics and chemistry, this object was dead. The lithium-ion cells should have degraded into useless chemical sludge 15 years ago. I held it in the palm of my hand, feeling the dead weight of obsolete engineering. I was about to toss it into the nearest concrete trash receptacle, and then the impossible happened. The dead weight vibrated, a harsh, mechanical buzz against my skin. The cracked screen flickered, illuminating the dim interior of my car with a sickly pale green light. A single text message appeared across the fractured display. The timestamp read the current minute. The message said, "You have 47 minutes." I looked up. I scanned the empty concrete pillars of the parking structure. There was no one watching. There was no one waiting. There was just me, the silence, and a piece of dead plastic that was somehow speaking. 3 stories about objects that should not work but do. Objects that should be empty but are full. Objects that should be silent but refuse to stop speaking. Welcome to Synapse Gap. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, watching the green backlight slowly fade back into black. My mind tried to rationalize it, a prank, a leftover charge, a localized electromagnetic anomaly, but none of those explanations accounted for the text. I pressed the worn rubber buttons. They clicked with a satisfying tactile resistance. I checked the contacts list. The directory was completely barren except for 3 entries. They were not names, they were just single letters. A, M, and Z. The message I had just received came from a sender identified only by a symbol that did not exist on any standard keyboard. It looked like a fragmented circle or a closed loop that had been violently snapped in half. The message originated from entirely outside the phone's internal memory architecture. It came from somewhere else, somewhere that was actively broadcasting a signal to a receiver that theoretically could not listen. I navigated to the call log. The digital interface was sluggish, ghosting across the broken pixels. There was one outgoing call in the entire history of the device. The timestamp indicated it had been placed exactly 30 seconds before my fingers brushed against the plastic casing. 30 seconds before I found it. It was to a standard 10-digit number with a Chicago area code. I did not think, I just acted. I pulled out my own smartphone, a glass and metal slab of modern connectivity, and dialed the number on the screen. The line rang 3 times. A woman answered. Her voice was cautious and hesitant. She said her name was Laura. She asked who was calling and how I had gotten this number. I explained the situation. I told her I was sitting in a rental car in a municipal parking garage, and I had just extracted an ancient Nokia from the upholstery. I told her the phone had just made a call to her number. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It stretched on for so long I thought the connection had dropped. When Laura finally spoke, her voice had lost all its warmth. It was hollow. She said, "I lost that exact phone 10 years ago. I did not just lose it. I dropped it off the side of a rented boat into a lake in northern Wisconsin. It sank into 50 feet of dark, freezing water." I leaned over the edge and watched the pale green screen sink deeper and deeper until the darkness swallowed it completely. That phone has been at the bottom of a lake for a decade. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I looked at the dry, dusty plastic in my hand. I told her the phone had just received a text message. I heard her breath hitch over the speaker. She asked what it said. I told her about the 47 minutes. I told her about the strange symbol. Laura was silent again. The silence felt heavy and suffocating. Then she whispered, "That number, the one with the strange symbol, that was my mother's assigned contact ID. My mother died in 2012. I have not received a message from that ID in 10 years." Before I could process what she was saying, Laura kept talking. Her words spilled out in a panicked rush. She told me the phone was never actually hers to begin with. She had found it in the autumn of 2012 at a bus stop on the south side of Chicago. It was a torrential downpour. The streets were flooding. The phone was just lying there on a wet wooden bench, the screen facing up, completely oblivious to the rain. There was no one else around for blocks. She picked it up to keep it from getting ruined. The second her fingers touched the casing, it vibrated. A message appeared on the screen. It said, "Do not trust the man in the blue car." Laura told me she looked up from the screen, wiping the rain from her eyes. Parked across the intersection, idling silently in the downpour, was a dark blue sedan. The windows were heavily tinted, but she could see the silhouette of a man in the driver's seat. His head was turned. He was watching her. She dropped her umbrella, turned, and sprinted in the opposite direction. She never went back to that bus stop. She never saw the blue car again, but she kept the phone. She kept it because she always wondered who had sent that warning, and more importantly, how they could possibly know she would be standing at that exact coordinate at that exact second, 10 years before I would unearth the very same device in a completely different state. She hung up the phone. I saved her number. I have never called her again. I did not throw the Nokia away. I could not. It felt like throwing away a loaded weapon. I placed it in the glove compartment of my personal vehicle, wrapped in a microfiber cloth. For months it sat there in the dark, but every few weeks without fail it would wake up. The muffled mechanical buzz would echo through the dashboard while I was driving down the highway at midnight. Always a new message, always from a different impossible number. The texts were aggressively short. They were always commands or warnings. One message simply read, "Check your back seat." I pulled over onto the shoulder of the interstate, my heart hammering against my ribs, and turned on the dome light. The back seat was empty. Another message read, "Do not open the trunk." I drove for 3 weeks without accessing my own trunk, terrified of what I might find inside or what might be waiting for me to unlock the latch. Another message, received at 4 in the morning, simply said, "She is lying." The paranoia began to rot my nerves. I started researching the phone's hardware specifications online. It was a standard Nokia model, officially released to the public in the year 2000. Production was completely discontinued by 2005. The lithium battery inside my unit should have been completely inert for over a decade. It is chemically impossible for it to hold a microamp of charge, yet it powered the screen. It vibrated the internal motor. It received data packets. I managed to pop the back cover off and extract the SIM card. It bore the faded logo of a regional cellular carrier that had gone bankrupt and ceased operations years ago. I tracked down a customer service number that had been absorbed by a larger telecommunications monopoly. I waited on hold for 2 hours, when a representative finally answered. I asked if they could run a diagnostic trace on a SIM card serial number from that era. The representative laughed. He said absolutely not. The company had been aggressively acquired in 2008. All legacy accounts were migrated, and the old physical network towers were literally torn down and sold for scrap metal. The digital records were purged from the servers after 7 years for legal compliance. That piece of plastic should not function. It lacked the physical infrastructure to possess a signal. It lacked the corporate network to authenticate a connection. It was a ghost operating on a frequency that did not exist in this dimension, but it did, and the muffled buzzing from my glove compartment became the soundtrack to my life. I never opened the trunk during that month. I never figured out who she was or what lie she was telling, but the phone kept pulling data from the ether. Eventually, the psychological weight became too heavy. On a cold Tuesday evening, I drove to an industrial park behind a massive grocery store distribution center. I walked up to a rusted industrial steel dumpster. I took the phone out of the microfiber cloth. I did not look at the screen. I threw it as hard as I could into the cavernous metal container. I heard it strike the bottom with a sharp, echoing crack. The sound of the plastic casing shattering and the glass completely pulverizing was unmistakable. I drove away and finally slept through the night. Exactly 3 days later, a brown corrugated cardboard package arrived on my front porch. There was no return address. There was no postage stamp. It had not been processed by any postal service. Someone had simply walked up to my door and placed it there. I took it inside and cut the tape with a kitchen knife. Inside, resting on a bed of packing peanuts, was the Nokia. It was taped securely to a square piece of rigid cardboard. The plastic casing was completely pristine. The screen was flawless without a single scratch. The swollen battery had been replaced with a perfectly flat new one. I stared at it, my breathing shallow. The phone vibrated against the cardboard. The green backlight illuminated the inside of the box. The message on the screen read, "You should have read the first one." Story 2. I have always had an affinity for old, forgotten things. 6 months ago, I was browsing a massive warehouse-style thrift store in Portland. The air inside smelled of dust, mothballs, and decaying paper. Tucked away in a dark corner, buried under a pile of discarded lampshades, I found it, an old executive-style desk. It was constructed of solid, uncompromising oak. It was incredibly heavy, remarkably ugly, and absolutely perfect for my home office setup. I approached the clerk, an older man with tired eyes. He told me the desk had been acquired from a recent estate sale in the suburbs. An elderly woman had passed away quietly in her sleep, and her out-of-state children had liquidated her entire life's accumulation in a single weekend. I paid $200 in cash. It took 3 grown men to load the monolithic piece of furniture into the bed of my truck. When I finally got it home and wrestled it into my office, I began wiping down the decades of grime. That is when I noticed the bottom right drawer was stuck. It was not stuck in the way that old wood swells with humidity and grips the frame. It was stuck in a way that felt entirely intentional. It felt like it was bolted from the inside. I pulled the brass handle with all my body weight. The wood groaned, but the drawer refused to budge. I crawled underneath the heavy oak frame with a flashlight and examined the tracks. That is when I found the anomaly. The bottom panel of that specific drawer had been modified. Someone had painstakingly taken thin, custom-cut pieces of plywood and paneled the bottom shut, securing it with tiny, headless nails. They had deliberately sealed a false bottom into the drawer. It was an incredibly shallow compartment. It was not designed to hide stacks of cash or jewelry. The space was only about 1/4 of an inch deep. It was designed to hide something perfectly flat. My curiosity overrode my respect for the antique. I retrieved a flathead screwdriver and a hammer from the garage. I wedged the steel tip under the plywood panel and pried it upward. The old nails shrieked as they were pulled from the oak. The panel snapped in half and clattered to the floor. Inside the shallow, dusty void lay a single photograph. It was printed on thick, high-quality paper, typical of mid-century darkrooms. It was a black and white image. It depicted a woman standing on the front lawn of a house I did not recognize. The architecture was modest. A single-story structure with a prominent front door and a low, white picket fence bordering the sidewalk. I flipped the photograph over. On the back, written in a very distinct, heavily pressured pencil script, were the words, "This is where you will live in 2026. I dropped the photograph onto the desk. The air in the room suddenly felt freezing. The handwriting on the back of the vintage photograph was mine. It was not a close approximation. It was not a coincidental similarity. It was an exact forensic match to my own penmanship. I pulled out my old college notebooks from a bookshelf and placed them next to the photo. I compared them under a desk lamp. The erratic, sharp loops of the letter Y were identical. The specific, lazy slant of the letter W matched perfectly. Even the depth of the indentation in the paper, the exact physical pressure applied to the graphite, was undeniably mine. But the logic was impossible. The photograph was printed on paper that had not been manufactured in 40 years. I have never seen that house in my entire life. I have never written that specific, terrifying sentence. And I have never, ever owned a pencil that lays down that specific soft shade of charcoal graphite. The cognitive dissonance became an obsession. I stopped sleeping. I spent every night scanning the internet trying to locate the architecture from the photograph. I used reverse image searches. I used architectural databases. I spent 3 grueling weeks manually scrolling through real estate listings across the Pacific Northwest. Finally, on a Tuesday morning at 3 a.m., I found it. It was buried in a sold property archive on a real estate website from 2023. It was a small, unassuming house located in Eugene, Oregon. It had the exact same roofline. It had the blue front door. It had the white picket fence. The public records showed it had been sold to a private buyer whose name was legally redacted through a trust. I clicked through the archived gallery of listing photos, my hands shaking over the mouse. The photos showed the interior of the house just before it was sold. They showed empty, echoing rooms. They showed freshly painted white walls and gleaming hardwood floors. And then I clicked to the fourth photo. It was a shot of the living room. In the far corner of the empty room, sitting silently against the wall, was a desk. It was a heavy, ugly, solid oak executive desk. It was the exact same desk I had just purchased at a thrift store in Portland. It was the exact same desk I was currently sitting at while looking at the screen. The desk is in my living room now. I did not move it to the office. I wanted it where I could see it. I bought a cheap glass frame for the black and white photograph and placed it dead center on the wooden surface. Sometimes I sit in the dark and just stare at it. I try to force my brain to remember writing that note. I try to unlock a repressed memory of holding that pencil, of hiding that photo behind the plywood. I cannot remember it, but a deep, sickening certainty has settled into my bones. I know that I will write it, eventually. The timeline is just waiting to close the loop. Story 3. 2 months ago, I was driving through a quiet, fog-drenched neighborhood in Seattle. I saw a handwritten cardboard sign taped to a street lamp advertising a neighborhood garage sale. I pulled over. Most of the tables were covered in cheap plastic toys and outdated clothing, but sitting on a folding table in the back next to a box of rusted tools was an old camera. It was a Polaroid model from the late 1990s. The heavy, blocky plastic design felt nostalgic. I picked it up. The older gentleman running the sale walked over and immediately shook his head. He told me not to waste my time. He said the internal mechanics were completely shot. The gears were jammed, the flash capacitor was blown, and the film cartridge loaded inside was at least 20 years expired. He was selling it for $5 purely as a retro decoration piece for a bookshelf. I handed him a crumpled bill and took it home. That night my apartment was entirely quiet. The rain was lashing against the windows. I placed the Polaroid on my kitchen counter. I do not know why I did it, but I picked it up, aimed it blindly at my wooden bookshelf, and pressed the heavy red shutter button. The camera did not click, it screamed. A loud, grinding, mechanical whir echoed through the kitchen. The ancient gears inside forced themselves to turn, grinding against each other with a sound like crushing bone. The rollers engaged. Slowly, painfully, a square photograph slid out of the front slot. It smelled strongly of ozone and bitter developing chemicals. I placed the blank square on the counter and watched the chemicals react with the ambient light. The gray fog slowly receded, revealing shapes and colors, but the image that materialized was not my bookshelf. It was a sterile, brightly lit hospital room. The perspective was from the corner of the ceiling, looking down. In the center of the room was a mechanical hospital bed. A man was lying in the bed, hooked up to an array of monitors and intravenous tubes. His face was obscured by an oxygen mask. Sitting in a plastic chair next to the bed was a woman. Her head was bowed, her shoulders shaking, both of her hands gripping the man's pale hand. Stamped into the white border at the bottom right corner of the Polaroid in jagged digital red ink was a date. The date was July 2027. The photograph I was holding in my hand had been taken a year and a half in the future. My breath caught in my throat. I grabbed the camera again. My hands were slick with sweat. I aimed the lens directly at my own kitchen cabinets and fired the shutter. The gears ground again. The flash did not fire, but the film ejected. I watched the image develop. It showed a kitchen, but not mine, or rather it was mine, but devastated. The cabinet doors were ripped off their hinges. The window above the sink was shattered and hastily boarded up with rotting plywood. A thick layer of dust and debris covered the countertops. Resting against the broken sink was a faded, dirty real estate sign. The word foreclosure was prominently visible. Panic took over. I turned the camera around. I held it at arm's length, aiming the black glass lens directly at my own face. I pressed the button. The mechanical scream seemed louder this time. The photo slid out and I watched it develop in real time. The image showed a man. It was me, but it was a version of me that had been hollowed out. The skin around my eyes was dark and sunken. My hair was graying and unkempt. I was wearing a thick black winter coat. I was standing in a field of green grass, looking down. At the bottom edge of the frame, I could see the top of a polished granite headstone. I was standing at a grave. I threw the camera into the bottom drawer of my hallway cabinet and slammed it shut. I locked the drawer and threw the key onto the top shelf of my closet. I have not touched the plastic casing since that night, but the camera is not dead. Sometimes at night, when the apartment is completely silent and the city outside is asleep, I hear it. A distinct mechanical click echoing from inside the locked drawer, followed by the faint, agonizing grind of the rollers ejecting another piece of film into the dark compartment. I keep the drawer locked. The camera keeps taking photographs. It is documenting a timeline that I cannot see. I am absolutely terrified to develop them. 3 disconnected anomalies. A cellular phone that receives encrypted text messages from people who are dead, using network towers that have been demolished. A heavy oak drawer that contained a vintage photograph accompanied by a handwritten note authored by a future version of my own consciousness. And a broken Polaroid camera that bypasses the present moment to exclusively document tragedies that have not yet occurred. I do not possess the engineering knowledge to understand how the Nokia bypasses physical infrastructure. I do not have the theoretical physics background to comprehend how a photograph can be sealed inside a wooden drawer decades before the subject of the photograph even knows the house exists. I do not know what the camera's lens is actually focusing on when the room is empty and I am not holding it, but I know the facts. I know the Nokia is still out there, sitting in the dark, vibrating violently in someone else's glove compartment right now. I know the oak desk is sitting heavily in the center of my living room, anchoring me to a future I cannot escape. And I know the camera clicked again last night. I heard the gears grind at exactly 2:47 in the morning. I just have not found the courage to unlock the drawer and look at the image. I still think about the phone constantly. Not the first one, the one I foolishly threw into the metal dumpster hoping to break the curse. I think about the second one, the pristine replacement that found its way to my front door. I wonder what intelligence is coordinating the logistics of its delivery. I wonder who is continuously sending it to unsuspecting people in rental cars and bus stops. I wonder what cataclysmic event triggers when someone finally decides to obey the commands and read the first message. The desk remains in my living room. I check the false bottom compartment periodically. I pry the plywood up, half expecting to find a new artifact. It is empty now, just dust and splinters, but the emptiness feels temporary. It feels like a stage waiting for the actors to return. I feel like it will not stay empty forever. The camera's behavior has escalated. It used to click once a month. Now it clicks every few nights. The sound wakes me from deep sleep. I have not opened the drawer to empty the accumulated film. There must be dozens of square photos piled up in the dark by now. Part of my brain, the rational, curious part, desperately wants to turn the key and look at the timeline. But the primal, survivalist part of my brain knows that I will find out soon enough regardless. The camera's predictions have never been flawed. The camera has never been wrong. If you ever find yourself walking through a dusty estate sale and you purchase a heavy used oak desk, do yourself a favor. Check the bottom drawer. Run your fingers along the wood and feel for the seam of a false panel. If you ever sit down in a rental car at an airport and find a heavy, outdated phone wedged between the seats, do not press the power button. Throw it out the window and drive away. And if you ever wake up in the dead of night and hear the distinct, mechanical whir of a shutter clicking in an empty room, do not turn on the lights. Do not open the drawer. Some anomalies are better left unobserved. Some futures are better left undeveloped. The last time I checked the camera before I locked it away permanently, the final photo it took showed a very specific date. November 15, 2026. I immediately checked the calendar on my wall. That date was exactly one day after my next birthday. The photograph depicted a close-up shot of a piece of paper resting on a wooden surface. I recognized the grain of the wood. It was the exact same oak desk I own. On the lined paper, written in soft charcoal pencil, were the words, "This is where you will live in 2026. It was the exact same handwriting. It was the exact same chilling message. The Polaroid camera had photographed the note that was sealed in the false bottom of the desk, but the note had been sealed in that drawer for decades. The camera showed the note to me before I had even found it. The camera had known about the existence of the desk before I ever walked into that thrift store. It had known about the house in Eugene before I ever saw the real estate listing. And now, in a terrifying display of temporal recursion, it was showing me an image of something I had already seen. It was as if the universe was mocking me, saying you are caught in a gravitational pull of events that have already been finalized. You are merely living through the echo of it now. I tried to violently destroy the camera. The lock on the drawer felt insufficient. I took the camera to an industrial metal recycling facility on the edge of town. I bribed the operator $50 cash to let me drop the plastic body directly into the industrial crusher. I stood on the catwalk and watched the hydraulic press descend. I watched the machine effortlessly compress the camera, along with a rusted engine block, into a dense, unrecognizable cube of shredded metal and plastic. I drove home feeling a massive weight lift off my chest. I felt relieved. I felt free. That night, the temperature in my apartment plummeted. I woke up shivering, and then I heard it, the mechanical grinding click of a shutter. I turned my head slowly. The camera was sitting on my nightstand. It was the exact same Polaroid camera. The plastic casing was completely unscratched. The black glass lens was perfectly clean, reflecting the moonlight. It had just taken a photograph of my bedroom ceiling while I was unconscious. I watched the film slide out and develop in the dim light. The photograph showed my ceiling, but there was a distortion. In the reflection of the dark window pane visible at the edge of the frame, there was a figure. A tall, indistinct silhouette standing directly inside my room, standing right behind my bed, watching me while I was asleep. The camera had documented the entity before I even woke up, before I had any idea I was not alone in the room. I grabbed my keys and ran out of the apartment. I have not slept in that bedroom since that night. I sleep on the living room couch with all the lights on. The camera is back in the locked drawer. It continues to click every single night. I do not look at the photos anymore. The pile in the dark just keeps growing. I tried to explain all of this to a close friend who works as a senior systems engineer at a major tech company. I needed a rational mind to debunk it. He listened patiently, then flatly stated that the phone was a physical impossibility. The specific cellular network protocol it required had not existed in North America for 15 years. The defunct carrier's SIM card could not authenticate without physical server handshakes. The rudimentary battery technology from the year 2000 could not possibly hold a charge for 2 decades without chemically degrading into dust. He looked at me with pity and said I was either hallucinating, lying, or deeply mistaken. I did not argue. I just reached into my pocket and handed him the heavy Nokia. The second his fingers wrapped around the plastic, the internal motor vibrated immediately. The green screen lit up his face. He looked down and read the text message. I watched the blood completely drain from his face. His expression shifted from arrogant skepticism to absolute primal terror. He slowly handed the device back to me and whispered, his voice shaking, "Delete it." "Throw it away," I asked him why. He looked at the walls of the coffee shop as if someone was listening and said, "Because whatever architecture is sending those data packets is not using a cellular network. It is using something else entirely. And based on that message, it has been waiting for you to find that specific piece of hardware since before you were even born." The anomalies are not isolated to me. A man named Thomas left a long, detailed comment on a video I posted online seeking answers about the Polaroid. He stated that he owned the exact same camera model. He purchased it at a rural flea market in 2018. He said the camera began aggressively printing photos of a young woman he had never met in his life. The photos showed her in various locations, growing older. It became an obsession. He spent 2 entire years actively searching for her across the country based on landmarks in the background of the photos. When he finally tracked her down in another state, he discovered she was already happily married with a child. The camera completely stopped working the exact day he finally met her face to face. It never ejected another photo. Thomas told me he took it as a cosmic sign to walk away. He never attempted to use the camera again. But he kept it on a shelf. He said that sometimes, late at night when the house is entirely still, he can hear the shutter click. And he knows with absolute certainty that the camera is still watching him, even when he is not looking at it. I keep all 3 cursed objects now. I refuse to throw them away again. They always come back, and when they do, the rules change for the worse. The Nokia phone is wrapped in aluminum foil and locked in a drawer in my kitchen. The massive oak desk sits like an altar in the center of my living room. The Polaroid camera is secured inside a heavy steel lockbox shoved deep under my bed. I do not use them, but I am fully aware that they are using me. The phone vibrates intensely against the foil exactly once a month. The heavy oak drawer of the desk sometimes slides open entirely by itself when I am in the other room, and the camera clicks its shutter every single night. I started keeping a log of the activity. I realized a terrifying pattern. The camera always clicks at exactly 2:47 in the morning. I went back and checked the digital timestamp on the very first text message I ever received on the Nokia in that parking garage. It was sent at exactly 2:47. It is the exact same time the digital clock on my car's dashboard randomly resets to 12. I do not know what the numbers 2:47 signify. I do not know what universal coordinates they represent, but I know that the fabric of reality thins at that exact moment every night, and I am always wide awake, waiting for it now. Last week, driven by a desperate need for context, I drove back to the massive thrift store in Portland. I wanted to ask about the desk again. The tired clerk recognized me immediately. He asked if I had found anything interesting hiding inside the wood. I hesitated, then told him the truth about the hidden photograph. The clerk did not look surprised. He nodded slowly, his eyes distant. He leaned over the counter and said in a hushed tone, "The elderly woman who previously owned that desk came into this store every single Saturday for 10 consecutive years. She never bought a single item. She just walked the aisles, running her hands over the old furniture. She confessed to me once that she was desperately looking for a specific desk that matched one she had seen in a vivid, recurring nightmare. She said the desk in her dream had a secret, sealed compartment in the bottom drawer. And locked inside that compartment was a photograph of a house she had never visited in her life. She told me she needed to find that exact desk before her heart gave out. I asked her why she was so obsessed with it. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, because the photograph is not meant for me. It is a message meant for the person who will buy the desk after I am gone." I felt the floor drop out from under me. I asked the clerk how she could possibly know that. The clerk wiped down the counter with a rag and replied she did not know. She just believed it with every fiber of her being, and it turns out she was absolutely right. I did not buy anything else that day. I turned around and walked out of the store into the cold Portland rain. There was nothing left to search for. The desk was already mine. It had been patiently waiting for me to find it for longer than I had even been alive. Look at the device currently resting in the palm of your hand. Look at the digital lights pulsing quietly above your head. Every single piece of technology in your life is tied to an invisible web of signals you cannot comprehend. How many days can your reality hold together when those signals start speaking for themselves? Subscribe to SYNAPSE Gap before the screen goes black.